Did you know that there is a country in Europe that declared independence almost 20 years ago, and that, to this day, half the world still refuses to recognize? A place that has a flag, a government, an army, but which on many maps appears as if it simply did not exist. Well, it does exist. Its name is Kosovo, the youngest country on the continent, but also one of the most controversial. And so the question arises, how did such a young country manage, in such a short time, to become the center of a dispute that divides Europe and the planet? Today, Bello Mundo will take you to Kosovo and show you why this is the country that almost no one knows exists. Number 1. Location and geographical data. If you look at a map of the Balkans, that mountainous region in southeastern Europe that was once the heart of the former Yugoslavia, you will find a piece of land measuring just over 4,200 square miles. This makes Kosovo one of the smallest countries on the continent. To give you an idea, it is about the same size as Querétaro in Mexico. It is a small territory, surrounded by mountains and with no access to the sea. Its borders are well defined. Albania to the west, Montenegro to the northwest, North Macedonia to the south, and Serbia to the north and east. But despite its small size, Kosovo has impressive landscapes. In the southwest, near the border with Montenegro, is the Bješket e Nemuna National Park, a mountain range of snow-capped peaks and green valleys reminiscent of the Alps in miniature. To the south, Shari National Park is home to turquoise glacial lakes and dense forests that become a destination for skiers in winter. And in the middle of this mountainous square is the capital, Pristina, a city of just over 500,000 inhabitants where modern coffee shops and tech startups coexist side by side with gray buildings from the Soviet era. Number 2. Population and language. With just under 2 million inhabitants, this small country is a true melting pot of peoples and cultures. The vast majority, over 90%, are Kosovar Albanians. They speak Albanian and, for the most part, follow the Muslim faith. On the other hand, there is a Serbian minority that represents about 6% of the population. They speak Serbian and follow the Orthodox Church. In addition to these two main groups, there are also Turks who arrived during Ottoman rule. There are also Bosniaks, Slavic Muslims from neighboring Bosnia. There are also the Romani people, part of the Roma peoples, popularly known as Gypsies in many regions of Europe. And finally, there are the Gorani, a small Slavic Muslim group that lives mainly in southern Kosovo, in the Shari Mountains. There is so much diversity in such a small space that depending on which street you are on, you can hear different languages coming from every corner. Officially, Kosovo recognizes two languages, Albanian and Serbian. But in Turkish neighborhoods, the dominant language is Turkish. Among Bosniaks, it is Bosnian, and in Romani communities, you can still hear Romani. It is as if each group has preserved its own little piece of identity. This mix also appears in everyday life. Street signs may be in Albanian and Serbian at the same time. TV programs change languages depending on the audience. And even in small towns, it is not uncommon to hear a conversation start in Albanian, switch to Serbian, and end in Turkish. The result is a young, small country with an impressive cultural diversity. And it is precisely this diversity that, throughout history, has helped spark some of the most tense conflicts in the region, which we will now tell you about. Number 3. History. Few places concentrate so much history in such a small space. The region that is now Kosovo was once home to the Illyrian peoples in ancient times, then became part of the Roman Empire and later the Byzantine Empire. In the 13th century, it became the heart of the medieval Serbian kingdom, full of Orthodox monasteries and palaces, but this era would be short-lived. In 1389, the advance of the Ottoman Empire changed everything in the famous Battle of Kosovo. And here, it is worth opening a parenthesis. The Ottoman Empire, for those who do not know, was one of the greatest powers of the Middle Ages and the modern age. Emerging in present-day Turkey, it grew by expanding its territories to the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Europe. And it was precisely in this movement of expansion that its armies reached the Balkans. However, they did not find a clear path. In Kosovo, there was resistance. On one side was Prince Lazar Hrebeljanović, a Serbian ruler who became a symbol of faith and sacrifice. On the other was Sultan Murad I, the Ottoman leader who had transformed the empire into a constantly expanding military machine. The encounter between the two armies was marked as one of the bloodiest battles in the region. According to tradition, both the prince and the sultan died during the fight, and the two armies were practically destroyed. In the end, the Serbs were unable to stop the Ottomans. The battle has never been forgotten. For the Serbs, it became a symbol of sacrifice, celebrated on Vidovdan, St. Vitus Day. For the Albanians, many of whom also fought there, it marked the beginning of a long foreign occupation. Over nearly 500 years of Ottoman rule, the region changed dramatically. Part of the population converted to Islam. The Albanian presence grew. The human landscape became a mix of different languages, religions, and customs within the same territory. Number 4. 20th century. When the Ottoman Empire began to retreat in the early 20th century, the Balkan Wars turned the page. Kosovo was incorporated into the Kingdom of Serbia. A few years later, with the end of World War I, this kingdom united with other peoples of the southern Balkans, and a new state was born, which would be known as Yugoslavia. During World War II, the map was reshuffled again. There was foreign occupation and border changes. In the post-war period, the country came to be ruled by Josip Broz Tito. Charismatic and firm, Tito managed to keep Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, Albanians, and many other peoples united under the banner of Socialist Yugoslavia. It was during this period that the region gained the status of an autonomous province, which gave some political and cultural space to its majority Albanian population. This arrangement only worked because Tito was the arbiter who held everything together. When he died in 1980, the glue that held Yugoslavia together began to unravel. In Kosovo, this meant that ethnic rivalries resurfaced, and a few years later, a rising politician named Slobodan Milosevic would light the fuse on this powder keg. Number 5. The powder keg. In the 80s, Yugoslavia was no longer the stable country that seemed to function by force. The economy was showing signs of wear and tear, ethnic tensions were reappearing, and in the middle of this melting pot was Kosovo. In theory, the province had been autonomous since the 1974 constitution. But for the Serbs, this was a historical mistake, because they considered Kosovo the cradle of their identity. For the Albanian majority, which made up more than 90% of the population, autonomy was not enough. They wanted much more. They dreamed of being their own republic within the Yugoslav Federation, on the same level as Serbia or Croatia. This tug-of-war soon turned into a crisis. In 1989, Slobodan Milosevic came to power and decided to nip the problem in the bud. He revoked Kosovo's autonomy with a single stroke of his pen. In practice, this meant closing Albanian language schools, dismissing teachers and doctors from the community, banning the use of the language in public offices, and placing the police and army under the direct command of Belgrade. It was a clear attempt to Serbianize a region that was overwhelmingly Albanian. The response was silent but firm. The Albanian Kosovars set up a parallel state. They created clandestine schools in garages, improvised clinics, their own tax collection system, and even elected a president in secret elections. For almost 10 years, Kosovo lived two realities at the same time. On the one hand, the official Serbian reality imposed from above. On the other, the clandestine Albanian reality maintained by the efforts of the community itself. It was a power struggle that could not last. Sooner or later, someone was going to lose patience. And that is what happened. In 1996, the Kosovo Liberation Army, or UCK, emerged. They no longer believed in peaceful resistance. They took up arms and declared war on the Serbian state. What followed was devastating. Between 1998 and 1999, Milosevic's troops responded with brutality. Entire villages were burned to the ground. Families fled in a hurry, carrying only what they could hold in their hands. Children crossed borders clutching rag dolls, while men disappeared without a trace. More than 800,000 people were forced to leave their homes. It was a clear attempt to expel Albanians from the region. The images were seen around the world: crowded refugee camps, reports of atrocities, and sexual violence used as a weapon of war. International pressure reached its limit. In March 1999, after failed negotiations, NATO intervened. There were 78 days of bombing against Serbian military targets. It was the first time in history that NATO had attacked a European country. And they did so without UN approval, because they knew that Russia and China would veto any decision. The action was controversial, but at the time it seemed the only way to stop the bloodshed. Milosevic resisted as long as he could, but in June, Serbian troops withdrew from Kosovo. Number 6. The UN and independence. For almost 10 years, Kosovo functioned as a kind of international protectorate. The UN administered it, KFOR ensured security, and the European Union helped with reconstruction. It was a transitional situation that everyone knew could not last forever. The Kosovar Albanians had one thing clear in their minds. They wanted total independence. No autonomy within Serbia, no federation, no sharing agreement. They wanted their own country internationally recognized with a seat at the UN. On the Serbian side, the position was equally inflexible. Kosovo was Serbian territory, period. They could give autonomy, they could make agreements, but they would never accept independence. Endless negotiations took place between 2005 and 2007. The UN tried everything: proposals for supervised independence, expanded autonomy, territorial partition, and an asymmetric federation. Nothing worked. Serbs and Albanians were at opposite ends of the spectrum, with no possibility of compromise. That was when the Kosovar government decided to act unilaterally. On February 17, 2008, in a historic session of parliament in Pristina, 109 deputies gathered to decide the fate of nearly 2 million people. Unanimously, they declared the independence of the Republic of Kosovo. The celebration in the streets of Pristina was immediate. Fireworks lit up the cold February sky, flags waved from every window, and people cried with emotion in the squares. After decades of struggle, war, and political limbo, they had finally achieved what seemed impossible: their own country. But the celebration was not universal. Serbia immediately rejected the declaration, calling it an illegal act that would never be recognized. Russia and China followed suit, arguing that unilateral independence created dangerous precedents for the international system. On the other hand, the United States recognized the new country the day after the declaration. France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Italy quickly followed suit. Within a few months, dozens of countries had given diplomatic recognition to Kosovo. It was the birth of Europe's youngest country, but also its most controversial. Number 7. Diplomatic limbo. And that is precisely where the central problem lies, explaining why Kosovo is the European country that no one knows exists. 16 years after the declaration of independence, Kosovo finds itself in a situation that is unique in the world. It exists for those who recognize it, but does not exist for those who do not. It is like Schrödinger's nation, both alive and dead at the same time, depending on the perspective of the observer. Today, 112 countries recognize Kosovo as an independent state. That seems like a lot, but it is not enough to join the UN, since Russia and China have veto power in the Security Council. Within the European Union itself, the situation is also awkward. 22 of the 27 member countries recognize Kosovo, but 5 do not: Spain, Greece, Slovakia, Romania, and Cyprus. Each has its own reason. Spain fears giving ideas to the Basques and Catalans. Cyprus follows the same line and does not want to set a precedent that could benefit the self-proclaimed Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Slovakia and Romania, in turn, are afraid of encouraging separatist movements among their own minorities. Officially, the argument is that independence was unilateral, without agreement with Serbia, and that this would set dangerous precedents for international law. In practice, it is a cautious foreign policy stance, so as not to encourage separatism in other parts of the world. This lack of recognition leads to curious and even absurd situations. Kosovars have been able to travel without a visa to the European Union since 2024, but they cannot come to Brazil and other Latin American countries. They can compete in the Olympics, but they cannot join several international organizations. The currency is another detail. They have officially used the euro since 2002, well before independence, but they are not members of the Eurozone. They simply adopted the currency on their own, and the European Union let it slide. Even the anthem shows this contradiction. Its name is Europe, but it has no lyrics. The government preferred not to risk offending the Serbian minority by choosing words in Albanian. The result? It is the only country in the world with an official anthem without lyrics. The flag is also unique. On a blue background, the golden map of Kosovo appears in the center, with 6 white stars representing the main ethnic groups: Albanians, Serbs, Turks, Gorani, Roma, and Bosnians. It is a flag that was born as a manifesto of diversity, but perhaps the clearest picture of this limbo is in the north of the country. There, some 50,000 Serbs live who simply do not recognize the authority of Pristina. They use the Serbian dinar instead of the euro, study in schools funded by Belgrade, and are treated in hospitals run by Serbia. It is as if there were 2 countries sharing the same territory, each pretending that the other does not exist. Today, Kosovo lives between extremes. On the one hand, it has one of the youngest populations in Europe. More than 70% of its inhabitants are under 35. The capital, Pristina, is buzzing with tech startups, music festivals, and artistic movements. It is a generation literally building a country from scratch. On the other, it faces serious challenges. It is the second poorest country in Europe, second only to Ukraine. 30% of the population lives below the poverty line, and youth unemployment exceeds 40%. Many end up emigrating to Germany, Switzerland, or the United States in search of opportunities. The economy is growing slowly, but the technology sector is beginning to take off, and tourism is discovering the beauty of the region. Prizren, a medieval city in the southwest, has already become a destination for backpackers. And DocuFest, an international documentary film festival, attracts visitors from all over the world. Relations with Serbia remain tense, but the European Union mediates constant dialogue. No one expects formal recognition anytime soon, but practical agreements on energy, telecommunications, and free movement are gradually being hammered out. Ultimately, Kosovo is proof that 21st century geopolitics is more complicated than any map can show. It is a living laboratory of how a nation is built in real time, with all the successes and mistakes that this entails. A country that exists and does not exist. It has a flag, a government, and an anthem, but no seat at the UN. The European country that no one knows exists, precisely because its very existence is still an unanswered question. And while the world decides whether it is real or not, almost 2 million people continue to live, work, dream, and build a future in a land that carries centuries of history and decades of struggle for recognition. Kosovo exists, at least for those who believe it exists. Did you know about this country? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoy discovering these curious differences between cultures, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and come with us to explore the world through the eyes of Bello Mundo. Thank you for watching so far. See you on the next trip.